Okay, we're on our last homework solutions video before the end of the course. And this problem is actually a combination of two problems, 16.7 and 16.8. Um, what I did is I actually did 16.7 first. And if you look, we have our initial payment of $30,000. We need to make sure we subtract that out at the end. These are all fees. And then we have our two and three items, which are the annual payments of 15 and 5%, and they're both due at the end of the year. Because they're both due at the end of the year and their percentage of sales, we can add them together. So what I did is I added 15% and 5%, and I got 0.20 or 20%, and I multiplied that by my annual sales, and I got my franchise fees annualized. So for year one, I took $400,000 and multiplied it by 0.20, and I got 80,000. And then for year five, I took $600,000 and multiplied it by 0.20, and I got $120,000. For Taco Ring, when we look at the problem, it actually has a lower initial payment of $10,000, but it has higher franchise fees. It has franchise fees of 17.5% and 5%. The assumption, of course, is that the sales are the same for either of these franchise options. So when I add my franchise fees here, I get 0.225 or 22.5%. And again, I do the math the same way. I take $400,000, I multiply it by 0.225, and I get $90,000 for year one. For year six, I take $600,000, I multiply it by 0.225, and I get $135,000. Now what I did is I actually extended everything out. So if you look, the first three columns on your left are 16.7, and then where you see the variable cost column where it has VC in parentheses 0.55, that's where 16.8 starts. What I did again is I went ahead and took my variable costs at 22%, 5%, 20%, and 8% for Dr. Taco, and I added them together, and that gave me 55.55 or 55%. They are a percentage of sales. So we're going to go ahead and take our variable costs and multiply it by sales, and we get $222,000 for year one. So the way I got that again is I took 400,000 times 0.55, and that gives me 220,000. And then again for year five, I took 600,000 times 0.55, and it gave me 330,000. So what we have is we have our sales in the far left column, and then we have our franchise fees in the third column from the left under Dr. Taco. We have our variable costs, which we just went over, and then we have fixed costs, which remain the same. So we have the $40,000 a year for the 5 years. The next step was calculating net income before taxes. So if we take our revenue and we subtract out our franchise fees, our variable costs, and our fixed costs, we get $60,000. Okay, so again, we take 400,000 minus 80,000 minus 220,000 minus 40,000, and that gives us $60,000. On both of these options, the tax rate was 15%, so we take 60,000 times 0.15, and that gives us 9,000. And then finally, to calculate our net income, we take our net income before taxes of $60,000, subtract 9,000, and we get $5,100. The final thing we need to do is discount our cash flows for the year, or our net income from the year, because we're not going to have that until the end of the year. And we did that at 10% in the problem. I told you that from this point on we'll only be using 12%. 12% on the test is what the percentage rate is. So on this example, when we discount the $51,000 at 1 year at 12%, or 1 year at 10%, I apologize, we get $43,634. So I went ahead and did the same calculations for years 2 through 5. I'll review year 5 once again. We take $600,000. We subtract out $120,000, which is our franchise fees that we calculated in 16.7. Then we subtract out our $330,000, which are variable costs, and we got that by multiplying 0.55 times our sales of $600,000. Then we subtracted out our $40,000 fixed cost, and that gives us $110,000. So $110,000 is 600,000 minus 120,000 minus 330,000 minus 40,000. And then we need to calculate our tax, which is 0.15 times $110,000, and that gives us 16,500. Then we subtract our taxes from our net income before taxes, and we get 93,500. And then we have to discount that at 5 years at 10% with the present value, and that's 0.6209, and that gives us $50,054. So our total, the present value of our total income on this is $236,200. And I highlighted that because we want the highest net income on our franchise option, so we want the highest option. And this one, if you look, of course, it's Dr. Taco. I'll go over the calculations for Taco Ring real quick. Again, the first three columns were the columns from 16.7. The fourth column, the variable cost, if we add up our 24%, 5%, 19%, and 7%, we get 55% again, coincidentally. So we do the math the same to calculate our variable costs. Our fixed costs for this example are $35,000, which again I got from the book. And finally, our tax rate is 15%. So for year one, we take $400,000 minus our franchise fees of $90,000, minus our variable cost of $220,000, which were 55% of sales. Then we subtract out our $35,000 fixed costs, and that gives us $55,000 net income before tax. We calculate our tax by multiplying 0.15 by the $55,000, and then we subtract that out, and we get $46,750. Again, we need to discount our year one net income, and we do that by multiplying the $46,750 by the present value of a lump sum for 1 year at 10%, and the multiplier is 0.9091, and that gives us $42,500. One of the common problems I see, or common mistakes I see on this problem, is that the initial payment is not subtracted out, and that's why I went ahead and put it in red and put parentheses around it so that you can see that it is subtracted out, and how I dealt with the initial payment. Because the initial payment was today, we don't have to discount it at all. So we do all of our math. We get $232,829 for our option B, or Taco Ring. And of course, we want the highest number because that's a net income number. So the present value the present value of our net income, or projected net income for Dr. Taco, is $236,230, and the present value of our projected net income for Taco Ring was $232,829, and of course we choose the highest.